Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading the Midwife's Apprentice, Chapter 7, The Devil. If the world were sweet and fair, Alyce, she must be called Alyce now, and Will would become friends, and the village applaud her for her bravery, and the midwife be more generous with her cheese and onions. Since this is not so, and the world is just as it is, and no more, nothing changed. Most of the villagers still paid no attention to Alyce at all. Some were mean, like Gromit Smith, near as big as a dozen Alyces, who would sit on top of the girl so Jack and Watt could rub chicken manure into her hair. Or the miller who pinched her rump when she brought grain to the mill to be ground. And some were kind, or nearly so, like the baker's wife, who always asked Alyce how she fared on this fine day, and the red-headed Will, who threw fewer stones at her since her saving of him, and sometimes stopped the taunting altogether, saying, this wag grows boresome. Dick's granny is hanging out the wash. Let's go tie knots in his breeches. And that is the way it was until the day the devil walked about. It started with the two-headed calf, born to Roger Mustard's cow, Molly. And then a magpie landed on the miller's barn and would not be chased away. Suddenly, the whole village saw witches and devils everywhere, and fear lived in every cottage. Alyce, who had slept alone outside in the dark for most of her years, even at fearful times like All Hallows' Eve and Walpurgis Night, had never yet seen the devil, and had nothing to fear from the night. It was she, then, who was sent to fetch and carry and deliver messages after dark, while the villagers stayed in their smoky cottages. So it was that she saw much of what went on in the village and how people lived their lives and spent their time. It was so quiet for a few days, with all the villagers inside and idle, that Alyce even had a little time to herself, to wander and think and plan, to watch and learn from old Gilbert Greyhead about the carving and polishing of wood, and to ask questions of the priest about sin and evil and the devil, humming to herself all the while. Then one damp autumn morning, Robert Weaver found strange footprints which wound about the village and stopped suddenly at the door of the church. He called Thomas a Bridge, who knew the ways of the woods and the tracks of the animals, to help him discover what sort of beast had been prowling about while they were asleep. "Were it a weasel, Thomas?" "No, that's a hoof. A weasel has toes." "A goat, Thomas?" "No, those prints are much too big for a goat." "A pig?" "No pig has dew claws like that." "A boar, Thomas?" "With that delicate arch, never a boar, Robert." "What then, Thomas? What has hooves, is larger than a goat, more delicate than a boar, and walks our village by night, but stops outside the church?" Any ideas? By dinner time, all the village was talking of the strange animal that even Thomas at the bridge could not identify. It only took a few incautious words and fearful whispers to convince them that the devil had found their village and was looking for souls to lead into sin. The next day, the strange, delicate hoof prints were found walking around Dick's granny's cottage and through the barley field. Robert and Thomas and the priests, whispering paternosters, followed the prints all the way to the mill, where, crossing themselves, they unlatched the door. The startled miller looked about, caught in the act of putting some of Dick's granny's grain into his own sacks. "The devil has indeed been here," cried the priest, "and he has tempted our miller into theft. But let us deal with this thief mercifully, for which of us could withstand the devil?" Now, I'm going to take an aside here. A lot of people have last names which reflect what their family, the occupation of their family, back when they took surnames, which in some countries was actually in the 1900s, but some families go back into the 1300s, 1400s. The name Miller, for instance, is the name of someone whose ancestors were millers. Can you think of other names that are occupations? Bakers, shoemakers. Well, some of them are not so easy, like chandlers were people who made candles, or wagoners were people who made wagons. Wheelwright was a name that people gave if they made wheels. Well, millers in English lore have always been cheaters. So you won't find very many people with the last name of Miller that comes from England. Most millers actually came from Germany, where the name was spelled a little different, but it meant the same and it was pronounced almost identical. So many people just changed the spelling of their name to the English spelling, because in Germany, millers were quite honorable profession and were trustworthy. But in England, we got a little hint of that in this, where the miller was trying to cheat one of the clients by putting extra grains from someone into his own bag. Okay, moving on. "The devil has indeed been here," cried the priest, "and he has tempted our miller into theft. But let us deal with this thief mercifully, for which of us could withstand the devil?" The villagers agreed, and so the miller, who had listened to the devil, did not have his hands chopped off, but only stood one day in the rain with his millstone tied around his neck. Now remember, he's guilty of trying to cheat someone, but he says the devil made him do it. The next day, all was quiet, and it was hoped that the devil had moved on to tempt another village. But as the day passed into evening, Kate, the weaver's daughter, ran to the priest with her tale of seeing the devil's prince leading to Walter Smith's barn. The priest and brave band of villagers, armed with rakes and pitchforks and sticks tied into crosses, hurried to the barn. The priest sprinkled the door with holy water and threw it open. There, cuddled in the haymow, was Gromit, the smith's lardy daughter, and the pockmarked pig boy from the manor. The boy gathered his breeches and flung himself out the barn window. Gromit, being larger, moved more slowly and was caught. For listening to the devil, Gromit was made to spend the night in prayer and fasting. She wept, though, for loss of pride, or loss of supper, none could say. As the villagers sat down to their dinners the next day, Wat, with the runny nose, hurried down the road calling, "I have seen him, a hairy demon with horns and claws and a great thrashing tail. He is on the road to the manor looking for souls to take to hell." Fully half the villagers ran away from the manor road, but the other half ran toward it, making sure the priest and the holy water preceded them. There was no sign of the devil on the manor road or in the woods on either side. Finally, the villagers started home, and there, near Roger Mustard's cottage, were the devil's prince, marching down the road, past Dick's granny's cottage, around Walter Smith's barn, and up to the door of William the Reeve's cottage. Again, the villagers flung open the door and again found the devil had been at work, for there was Wat finishing off William Reeve's leg of mutton dinner. Now, pausing again, now here we have come across several more surnames that are based on their occupations. For instance, there was the Smiths. That would be short for blacksmith. And there was William Reeve. A reeve was a person who made, I think, barrel hoops. And we have a fellow by the name of Wat. And my grandmother's name was Watson, meaning son of Wat. Wat is not a very common name today, but apparently it was at one time. So some names are called patronymic names, and that means they end in son, or in Scandinavian countries, they often end in daughter. Patronymic names can also be like Mac or O, because that was the way the Irish and the Scottish had patronymic names. And patronymic means father's name, patronymic. The priest decided that Wat's gluttony and deceit were the fault of the devil, and none of the boy. So Wat's face was not branded, but William Reeve's bad-tempered pigs were in his care from that day on. So people are being punished for the devil's work, but they're not punished as badly as if the devil weren't in town. The next morning, it was a larger group of villagers who followed the hoof prints to the woods where the broken-toothed Jack and his friends were clearing brush from Roger Mustard's field. Like the devil had tricked the boys into laziness, for they were found asleep and given a sound beating. 2 days went by with no sign of the devil. The villagers grew calmer, thinking themselves fortunate not to have been tempted by the devil, and then found out in so public a fashion. Then on a misty morning, the devil walked the village again. By this time, no one expected to catch him, but they were eager to see whom they would find in what sin. So now they are no longer interested in finding the devil so much as who in the village is sinning, and they can find them. So all the village followed the prince, except for the midwife, who was called to the manor at the last minute, and Alyce, who was elsewhere. The parade of villagers laughed and gossiped out of the village and along the old north road. As they followed the prince through a field, they grew quiet. The prince stopped near a large tree, and so did the villagers. From behind the tree came the call, "Is that you, Jane, my dove?" And out leaped the baker, holding a bunch of Michaelmas daisies and a basket of bread before him. All was quiet. The baker's wife stepped forward and took the flowers as the villagers turned and walked away, leaving her to sort out what was the devil's work and what was the baker's. Because you remember, Jane is the name of the midwife. After the departing villagers passed the river at a spot where the water ran swift and deep, Alyce stepped out of the woods. She took something from under her skirt, threw it into the river, and followed the crowd home. And so it was that all, except for the fortunate midwife, who had taunted or tormented Alyce, were punished for their secret sins. And this the devil had never seen in the village again. And no one but Alyce knew why. Several days later, in a village where the river meets the sea, there washed up on the banks 2 blocks of wood, carved in the shape of the hooves of some unknown beast. No one could figure what they were or where they had come from, so eventually Annie Broadbeam threw them into her cooking fire and enjoyed a hot rabbit stew on a cool autumn night. So, who was pretending to be the devil, but at the same time revealing to the village the sinners in the village, and punishing those who had embarrassed and punished her for just being herself? Well, that was certainly an interesting chapter, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.